And thank you for coming here, both in person and to those attending online. I hope you can hear me. I'm going to try to stay put, but hopefully we'll see. I tend to, wave and walk around. I have to say, after Jason's keynote today, I thought maybe I should pack and go home, looking at the title of my slide. But I think what I'm going to try to do today is really give an overview of some of the work we're doing at Sheffield Hallam University, some of the steps we've taken, and it might touch on some of the things Yusra and Lena earlier mentioned as well. So I thought a little introduction about myself. I'm not going to read that, but I came to the UK as an overseas student. And today I'm going to talk to you kind of through the lens of an overseas student from a country who was colonized, settling in the UK. We've now mixed race kids. So, there's a lot going on and lots of different lenses. And I'm currently a senior lecturer of biosciences at Sheffield Hallam University and also the EDI person. Now, before I start, I'm just going to plug in two advisory groups, which are kind of under the Royal Society of Biology. If you're an early career researcher, please do follow the ECL hubs and do look at what they are involved in, and also the Bioscience Awarding Gap Network, of which Nick is also leading member there and doing great work, organizing workshops, so connect with us. Now, first, I would like to talk a little bit about what do we mean by awarding gap. As you know, awarding gap, previously known as the degree attainment gap, is the difference in the number of students from minoritized background who are awarded a good overall degree. So that's a good, like a first or 2-1 compared to their peers. And I'm using the word, or now we're using the word awarding gap, as it implies an institutional deficit rather than a student deficit model, which what degree attainment gap referred to. And I'm also using the word minoritized students rather than BAME, because again, there are some discussions going on about with the use of those words. Now, this is some of the UK HE ethnicity data. So over 80% of white students receive good honors compared to 68% minoritized students. And at this rate, it's going to take years, as you can see here, for the white-black awarding gap to close. And I think Nick is going to give a talk about this, looking at the program tomorrow. But why does it exist? Now, I'm just going to say, I am teaching at a post-92 university, okay? So some people might be tempted to think, maybe they're the weaker students, maybe they're not achieving as well. But if you look at data from studies, they show that even students coming with the same grades, a kind of gap starts appearing as early as their second year. And we need to bear in mind that not all students are equal. And I think I quite like Yusra's depiction of that root there, the branches, with the students coming in with different experiences. So bringing together with them different societal capital, economic capital, cultural capital. And what we need to think about is how to remove those. So at SHU, this is how we compare with the awarding gap. And as you can see, we do have a significant gap there. But if you look at the landscape between the minoritized student qualifiers and the white students, you can see more white students are achieving better, although the gap with the number of minoritized students is closing. And more of them are getting good honors degrees. Now, this degree awarding gap and also exists in our bioscience courses. And we are looking at various ways of addressing it, including trying to decolonize the curriculum. And although I'm going to be using the word decolonisation, we're thinking about being more inclusive as well, diversifying. Because we think that what we're teaching, the content, how we're delivering it, will have an impact on student engagement. And that's why it's quite important to think about almost all the different things. So here we are looking at what we teach, the content and how we're delivering it to the students. So I've got a question here, if you don't mind joining in. We've had loads of questions on decolonization, so you should all be experts by now. What we mean, but I'm sure we're still deliberating on the meaning of the words. So would you be willing to type what you understand now by decolonization of the curriculum? And it will appear here. If, please do type a few words. What does it mean to you? I mean, this is obviously a topic that's going to come up, and it'll be interesting to see what people are thinking about now. So equality, and 9 participants typing, truth, structural changes, moving central focus away from Western perspective, equity, de-Westernization, it's interesting, undermining unfair power structure. People online, please do joining as well. I'm going to take a picture of this later. Fair representation. So a lot of really good works coming through, I would say, and it's quite interesting to see how people are thinking and what they are addressing colonialism, which is obviously one of the key things. Fair representation. Okay, I think I am now going to move on to my next slide. Thanks a lot, but the main thing is, okay, white, interesting. Okay, maybe what? View, equity, social justice. Okay, fantastic, thanks a lot. So what I'm going to do first is use an example to show how we can decolonize, and then kind of explain how I look at that particular word and what I'm thinking, which some of you might identify with, and some of you might, think of decolonization a bit differently. So say traditional lecture, if I was talking about quinine and malaria, I might say, students, here's the structure of quinine, how it's working, what it's doing, maybe a mechanism of action. I'm a bioscience teacher, I need to deliver content, time is limited, okay? So that's what I'm doing here, just putting it in context. Now with decolonization, I might want to tell the students a little bit about the history. How, for example, it was used as a muscle relaxant by the Quechua people, shipped to Rome, French scientists isolated it, treated or cured King Charles II, and how basically it has helped build the British Empire. How, Winston Churchill said it saved more lives, of the English, so many lives of the Englishmen. And interestingly, how although it has built helped build the British Empire, people who actually needed it don't have access to it as easily. Okay? So this is what I will call an example of decolonization. Okay? Giving a bit of history of the chemical you want to talk about, putting it within context, and personally, with or without decolonization, knowing that will make me as a student more willing to engage with that material and remember it than that dry slide I showed earlier with the chemical, the pathway, and what it's doing. So having some background and context also helps student engagement and interest, which is what we want to do when we're teaching, right? Get students interested in the material, not just get them to pass the exams. So decolonization is kind of rethinking and reframing the curricula and research that has traditionally upheld kind of Eurocentric and pro-colonial view. It's confronting and challenging colonization practices that have, influenced past and present education. Now, what we need to remember is that why is it Eurocentric? It's because if you think about it, the world, most of us speak, loads of people will speak English. So that's why the English way of thinking, kind of education has come from a lot of those countries. There are, and I think people have looked into it. For example, when Charles Darwin was looking at, evolution and all of that, there were other areas, people in Middle East, India, and other places, coming up with that same kind of thinking, but because of language, certain thoughts have been kind of promoted more, if that makes sense. And that's what we learn. Not necessarily because those thoughts were developed in Europe, but because of the language barrier as well. Okay? So there's a lot of information. So that's, we need to bear in mind that what we're saying is just how things have been packaged and delivered for so many years, and maybe we need to rethink our thinking. Decolonisation should also be an ongoing process. Some of the things we're doing at Sheffield Hallam University is just kind of touching on it, starting different things, but it's not going to end. And although I am using the word decolonising, I think what we're thinking of moving towards is an inclusive education and almost a more global overall view, that rather than this kind of narrow perspective on what we think is important. So what we're doing at Hallam. So as part of our different kind of approaches we're using, there's a project going on called Decol Hallam. And for this project, a focus group involving minoritized students, that's our second year students, were asked a little bit about fitting in and sense of community. What was interesting to see is that, I won't read all of that, but they felt like they belonged to Hallam. They could see minoritized students, minoritized staff who they describe as role model. They felt reflected in their course because of their tutors, somebody mentioned that earlier, and because of the people facilitating their learning. They found it very diverse. So we thought, we're doing quite well, right? This is good, we'll take that. How do they feel, whether they feel represented within the teaching content was the other question. And here, they felt their curriculum is mostly white, Western, Eurocentric based. But interestingly, they thought that when they were allowed to focus on some areas, they could then pick and choose what might be of interest to them. And that could be from cultures, places, background that might appeal to them more and move them away from that kind of Eurocentric base kind of focus. They felt that they experienced different perspective when working on their own case studies, because again, that choice is important. And the other thing that came through and was quite interesting was that, and I think somebody mentioned that, was it you, Sra, about the tutor's own experience coming into class, for example, having a discussion with a lab in a session where a topic was discussed and the tutor can then talk about that topic, bringing in their own experience, was very useful to them, and in fact more powerful than me just giving a dry delivery on something I cannot connect with. Okay, so decolonisation is not just about obviously the content and things, it's also about how we're delivering it, it touches so many levels. Right, so here I have two images for Marvel fans, if you've got kids, you will recognize Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, movies which are all Black cast actors, but for two white men in Black Panther. And then you can recognize this picture here of a female scientist. Now, what word do you think kind of sum up these two pictures? One single word. Absolutely. So this was from an article showing that scientists now more children than ever drawing women as scientists. Traditionally, nurse, kids will draw a female person, doctors, male person, astronaut, the gender kind of stereotype as well. And here, what we are talking about, and again, that's what I mean, it's kind of inclusive education, representation matters, okay? So we want to have minoritized students represented, but also we need to think about wider aspects as well. Now, this is, so I was talking to a student and we were talking about this topic. He thought it was really interesting and he goes, I'm going to go and look at my books and see who's represented. Do I need to explain what this is showing? These are two books, right? First year, chemistry course, and I think he's got introduction to organic chemistry here up to here, and to inorganic and material chemistry. All middle-aged white men. Okay, he was shocked, right? And it makes us think about, how are, we always say that, I mean, okay, this is chemistry, but we always say sometimes we need to have more representation, more female, more minoritized scientists. But, if you're reading and this is what you're coming across, it kind of tells you, well, I won't be doing that well. I'm not going to be in those books. Is that because there's a scarcity of black chemists? No, not at all. It's just how things have been packaged and sold and, made available and being marketed, and, what information are being selected and presented to students. So that's something else we need to think about. And we all know very well that, you can't always be what you can't see. Some people will push the barriers. Some people will kind of break, glass ceiling. But you do want to be able to see yourselves. If you're scientists, if you're students there, you want to see that people like yourself teaching and people like yourself within the course. So here, just to highlight, and this is an extract from Universities UK, saying that having a tutor the same background give them sense of comfort, and also language we're using when we're teaching, having shared lived experiences, cultural references we're using, all help towards engagement. And I think these all contribute towards decolonizing the curriculum. Talking to the students on the same wavelength so that they understand what we're saying. Now, again, a little poll here. Is diversifying the same as decolonizing? Where are we with this one? What are we thinking? That was easy, wasn't it? No, it's not. So diversifying is acknowledging the differences between individual, I would say, or group of people, and recognizing them as being positive. Quite often, I'll say we'll use diversification in the context of inclusivity. But it's not the same as decolonizing. And, diversity, mainstream, we just got diverse people here. We've got people of all kind of different background. But that is not decolonization. Decolonization is more targeted, more specific approach. It can form part of decolonization, but is not equivalent. And I quite like this quote here from Kavita Barnott, and I'm just going to leave you to read that. So what are we doing? So at university, when we started, we had this exercise with our first year students. Break the ice, bring a famous scientist, present that famous scientist to us. Do you know what? After a few years, I didn't want to hear any more about Marie Curie, Charles Darwin, Louis Pasteur, Edward Jenner. Thought surely there are more people those students can think about. And it was the same every year. So we've decided to change that. Now we give them names of scientists and they have to go and find that information. And it's quite interesting that they go, oh, I didn't realize this. And I'm not putting the names here on purpose. If you want to find out who they are, come and find me. But, or I can tell you later. But it was quite interesting for students to do some homework and find that there's a lot more scientists out there than the one they've come across. What we're also doing, we are celebrating minoritized and other scientists throughout the academic year. Black History Month, we're highlighting a Black scientist every week, all of us academic staff. We had one of our Black, academic lecturers to give a talk about his own experience to the students so they can identify and just not and see the human side of the person, how that person, their path almost to being appointed and getting to that position. And then they can see, we can do that. And as I say, inclusivity, LGBT month, women in STEM, British Science Weeks, these are all great opportunities to highlight people, different scientists, to bring a bit more, change it and kind of broaden the students' mind, because they need to know who's out there and what people are doing. We are also using the cultural sensitive curricular scales, which Yusra has explained very well, so I won't go into that, to look at that, what we're doing. And within our department, we are assessing the teaching content, evaluating whether it's inclusive as well. And I've shown Black scientists earlier, but again, in the name of inclusivity, we need to think about gender as well. So female chemist, this is a whole page of them. How can that book not include a single one? So we need to think about decolonising, but inclusive. And here we're talking about, not just examples really, which students can identify with. There's a lot of them, but here, for example, in the field of medicine, inclusivity is a problem. All symptoms are presented based on white representation, okay? So sometimes people go, oh, so-and-so's looking a bit sick, they're looking a bit pale. If you look at me, you won't be able to tell if I'm sick or not, because I don't go pale. And I don't blush the same way, you know what I mean? So you can't look at the same symptoms. And I think with strep as well recently, there were some specific symptoms people were telling others to look at for. And this book was advertised a few years ago about Minding the Gap, where I think it was a medical student, decided to be proactive and write a book to show how certain symptoms are presented in minoritized population, and that's what we need to do, meningitis, yes, bruises and all of that on white skin, harder to spot on somebody who's got darker skin. So what I'm saying here is, okay, these are quite drastic, examples, but think about the examples you're giving. For example, when I'm teaching level 7, so that's my master's, I run a module where we're discussing a lot of different techniques that can be used in diagnostics. Now, some of the students, international students in that case, will not have a lot hands-on lab experience. Some of them come from Nigeria, India. So we can use, for example, malaria, which they know about, have a good understanding of, so they have some knowledge, and then use that to relate to the particular techniques. And here, by just swapping examples of what we are teaching, what happens is that suddenly students go, oh, I know this, I've got experience of this. They can engage with that discussion. They're not shutting down because they can't identify as readily with the content matter. And also, if you think about it, a lot of students, and some of them from minoritized background, because of, it could be accents, it could be experience, they might not be as ready to engage with what you're teaching. So that engagement will help with narrowing that engagement together with content. Decolonisation can help to narrow that awarding gap, because they'll be interested, they'll turn up, they'll study, they'll carry on with the course, and they will get the degree, they'll succeed. And somebody might go, well, this is not really relevant in the UK. home students, malaria, yes, we know about it. Well, if they can identify or relate to George Clooney or Cheryl Cole, they'll know that, celebs traveling, for example, have contracted malaria, have they, suffered if they're reading whatever magazines. But this is bringing all kind of different aspects together and giving an overview of conditions in particular country, not here, but teaching what we want to teach them and relating it to some other concept that certain students might be able to relate to. The dreaded publication reading list. Okay, we'll touch on that. This is a map of global north, global south, kind of economic developed and developing countries. This is 2016. I couldn't find a more recent map, but if you look at the scientific papers published by researchers in China and US, you can see how distorted this map is, okay? There's a lot of papers published by, traditionally global north countries and not so much representation from the global south. Now, is that because they're not doing good science? No, there is a lot of good science going on here. But again, and I'm guilty of that, looking for a paper, reading, time is ticking, I need to get my material on there. What I can do is, go to Google Scholar, type my search words, see the hit of papers that's being there, pick up one, and chances are they'll be from one of those global north countries, right? Where maybe they're more valid or more specific papers that might come from another country. So again, thinking about where we're signposting our students is also important, trying to broaden the reading list and resources and online. So we are working with the library to try to think about how we can tackle that. Now, so far we're thinking about our content, we're thinking about what we are doing in terms of how we're teaching them. We've also developed some or set up some minoritized student group. So minoritized student group, LGBTQ+, and the bioscience and accessible student space group. Reason for that is we want students to have a voice within the department. Quite a lot students from minoritized group, for example, even LGBTQ+ group, will not will not have as much to say. So on that note, I was just going to say how we teach, but we can skip that. All I'm going to say now is what we want to do. So some of these other slides were just reiterating some of those different topics. But what we need to do is, there's a lot of conversation we're having, which is great, but we need to start taking some action. And I tabbed this and then I realized channeling Elvis here. But think about little steps we can do to try to make small changes, and together they can make a bigger impact. And on that point, I would just like to thank people in the department who are engaging with this conversation, students, and also thank you here for inviting me to give this talk. Thank you very much.